Welcome to our Learn at Work webinar, sponsored by the journal Work, which is published by iOS Press in the Netherlands. I'm Karen Jacobs, the founding editor of Work, and I'm delighted you could join us today. We have a very special presentation on a topic that is really important to all of us. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sarah. Sarah, please start your presentation, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I'm here with my colleague Anja, and I'm going to present to you the summary of our paper that has been published in Work. But at the beginning, we want to introduce ourselves. Maybe Anja, you can start.
Yes, sure. So my name is Anja Göritz. I'm a professor of psychology and I specialized in occupational and consumer psychology. And I have been working at the University of Freiburg in Germany, where I lead the Department of Occupational and Consumer Psychology. And I specialized in two fields of research. My first field is web-based data collection, using the internet to collect data. And my second field of interest is technology-related changes of work, its potential and its challenges. That's it.
I've been working with Anja on this project. I'm going to present the results of. My name is Lütke Lanfer, which might be hard to pronounce for English-speaking people, but it's a very German name. And I've been working at the University of Freiburg, in particular on the topic of psychological health at work. Have been working at the University of Dresden before, also in that research area, so I'm very interested in promoting and training psychological health at work, or finding ways to do so. I just finished my PhD and defended it last month. So that's it, and I'm very happy to present this presentation to everyone who's listening. The work has been done by myself and Anja, and also a colleague who can't be there today, Cathrin Becker. I really thank her for the contribution to the paper. I first want to introduce our project. It's called Prägewelt. It has been taking place from 2016 to July 2019. As you hear from the numbers, it has been a pre-pandemic project, so data collection took place before COVID happened. It was a field study and had 4 collaborators, 2 scientific and 2 more from the field. The ISF in Munich were the leading scientists. They do a lot of work in sociology. We from the University of Freiburg, we were the psychological part. We investigated what I'm going to present to you today. And we had 2 consulting companies, Ecom and RES Group, who are very who know a lot about implementing open space offices into the real world and into buildings. Yeah, the topic of the field study was roughly translated health promotion in new working environments, which in our case was open space offices. It was funded from the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and it was managed by the Project Management Agency in Karlsruhe. There's also a homepage which is accessible still, but it's all in German, unfortunately. But you can look into different publications that have been also published in English. The main project questions in this project were if there is actually a transformation of office environment happening. There's lots of news about it, or there was before there was the pandemic, that new offices were implemented, but we all wanted to know if this transformation actually happens, if there is a transformation in regard of office environment, and what role does this transformation play in employees' work and health. So the objective was to look to have an insight into the transformation of work, and also to find health promoting designs for open space offices. When I talk about open space offices, maybe some people think of this kind of structures that people used to think of when they think of open plan offices. There is lots of desks in a big room, and there were partitions in between, or cubicles that people had to work in. So it was more a cost thing than anything else. Also, if you look on the lower right side, it's also what has been seen before, and colors that are present were gray or the popular orange. But if we think of open space offices now, or open offices now, it looks somewhat like this, and this very colorful, very creative, very light, very open, different kind of work options. For example, in the picture on the left, in the middle, there's a telephone booth, or where people can go to have quiet conversation on the phone, or there's a breakout area where you can play soccer on your break, or there is a couch where you can have informal meetings or formal meetings with your colleagues. Then maybe meeting or group rooms look like the picture in the right corner, and there's always a coffee place or somewhere where you can have coffee and informal meetings. So having this in mind, the open space definition we used in our paper was, or in our project, was the following: open plan office that incorporate task-specific workstations next to individual work desks. So it was really important that there are more options to work from than your individual desk, for example, phone cells or meeting rooms or meeting points. There has been a vast variety of definitions, but this is the one that we have been working with. So why did we look into this office environment? As before, there is a change happening in that area, and globalization and digitalization led possibly to this change. Everything has to be flexible. It has to be possible to work at various places. So there is a trend to implement this new office concept. Reasons are vast. For example, it reduces cost. Floor space is really expensive in big cities, for example, Frankfurt. Also, it keeps the organization flexible, as you can put a various amount of people in one workspace, as not everyone has their, for example, own desk, if they use desk sharing. It's also said to lead to a higher motivation, more innovation of the workers, and also people want to boost performance. And an important aspect is the war for talents, at least here in Europe or Germany. The baby boomer generation leaves the market, the workforce market, and young talents is rare. So organizations want to keep themselves attractive for this younger age group. What is new, as you've seen in the pictures before, it's not only the size compared, of course, to cell office or shared office. It's much bigger, but it's also that some desk sharing is used. Desk sharing, I want to define it shortly. It's when you don't have a fixed desk, but if you come to your workplace, you have to look for a desk that's free, and you have to take your computer and your stuff with you. Also the openness, so there are no partitions. When you enter the room, you can see in one glance who is there and who can I talk to. If the rooms you need are open. So there are different work options, a telephone booth, meeting rooms, informal booths, couch, sofa, and so on. So this is the new aspect of the open space office. Maybe some of you say, okay, it has been there also with the more traditional office, but this is something that is stretched in this area. There is a definition of categorization of offices that is very popular and is widely used. It's from Bowden, Danielson, and Bowden from 2008, where they distinguish 5 categories. The single office, so there's only one workstation or one person owns the room. It might have different workstation in it, but one person owns the room and works there. Then there's the shared room office where there are 2 to 3 persons per room or workstations. And Bowden, Danielson, and Bowden used or called rooms with more than 4 workstations or 3 workstations open space offices already. So there's a small, medium, and large size open space office. They distinguished according to the workstations. Importantly for me, that large open space offices are offices above 25 workstations or person per room, but it can go up to 200 persons per room. So there's a large group of offices that actually fit into the large office, open space office category that can be very, very different. I think it's very, very different if you have 25 people in one room or 25 workstations, or if you have 200 or 100. So this category is rather broad and might in the future can be distinguished even further maybe. This category has been used in many studies, so we will apply it in our study, or we applied it in our study as well. What do we know about office environment and well-being or health at work? There is not much evidence on the effect of office concept on work performance and psychological health specifically. The few existing studies show inconsistent results. So there have been some reviews investigating the effects of office concept on work and health. All these reviews have only found less than 20 or 30 studies investigating this relationship. Also, they may come to different results if it's positive or negative, but all of them showed that there is not enough evidence in this regard. There is, to my knowledge, no meta-analysis so far because there's so scarce literature. Also, the results are very inconsistent. For example, if you have 3 studies on well-being or office size and well-being, one study showed there is an increased well-being, other found no effect at all, and the other one said, okay, if you're in an open space office, you have a decreased well-being. So there's really inconsistent results or no results. What can be explanations for that? It's first of all the design of office concept varies across studies. Each organization has a slightly different office concept, maybe different working options or no working options and just a big room with desks. Also, there's a lack of longitudinal studies, and often there's only one aspect of office size investigated in this study. The process of implementing office concepts or new concepts is very different between organizations and could also influence the results. Also, confounding variables that are in the organization can also play a role. So that's why there's a big research gap in that area, and not only a small number of studies investigated the role of also on employers' work and well-being, but there is also inconsistent results. That's why we conducted the project and wrote this study. From my perspective as a work psychologist, I can say there is an established fact of well-being at work. That is, it is influenced by psychosocial work conditions that are job demands and resources, for example. There are several theories and established facts that, for example, workload, control, or social support influence the well-being and the psychological health at work. There is the job demand control model from Karasek, who has been supported in several studies. There's also the effort reward imbalance theory from Segrest that had also is widely known and also established. So for me, it's clear psychosocial working condition influence well-being at work. So if you are in the office environment and you see that there is this new trend, you ask yourself, how does this fit into what I know already? So the question is, what role do office features of the office environment play in well-being at work next to the established job demands and resources? And that's what we want to look into. We use the job demand resources model as a framework. Here we know that job demands produce strain, for example, mental, emotional, and physical job demands should produce a strain or burnout, often used here, and that should negatively affect organizational and personal outcomes, for example, performance, innovation, or in our case, health. Then there's the second path, job resources, just like support, leadership support, or team support, autonomy or control, and feedback and other resources should have motivational potential, which should lead to engagement and to better performance, better innovation, and better psychological health. When you have this model, you can add some aspects or features of the working environment, of the office environment here. This has been proposed by Morrison and Mackey. If you look at the office environment, there might be office size and opening, that could be job demands. Office size is often said the bigger the office, the more demands are to the worker in there. There's more noise, more brain noise, maybe. There are people sitting up, sitting down, standing up, coming and going. That might influence your concentration. That could be a job demand. Also feeling like people looking at you and being able to look at your desk and for everything you're doing. It could also cause demands and stress. On the resource side, desk sharing is often said that it might be a resource as people have more control over the working environment. They can decide where they want to sit, which colleague they want to talk or sit and work together. Also, the number of working options, of course, gives you more control, more options where to work with what task. These resources should have a motivational potential and lead to higher performance or better health. Yeah, and that's what we wanted to investigate in this frame model, and we did this in this paper. And the overall question is, do office features contribute to employees' well-being next to well-established working conditions, as I mentioned before? And we used 3 different analyses or 3 different depths of analysis to answer this question. First, in line with previous studies, we used the category office size or the feature office size and investigated it on our 2 well-being constructs. This is irritation and subjective well-being. Here we use cross-sectional data. In the second step, we looked more closely at different office features, for example, openness and desk sharing, next to the classical job demands and resources, and looked at their influence on irritation and subjective well-being. In the third, here we also used cross-sectional data. In the third step, we also looked at the specific office features and the classical job demands and resources on change of well-being over a 1-year time frame. Here we used longitudinal data. We, to investigate all these questions and do all this analysis, we had 4 organizations that worked together with us in the project. They were medium to large size and from various sectors. So we had 1 governmental organization, we also had a production organization and 2 consulting agencies. All office environments can be called modern, so when you came into the room, you felt very open and welcome. There was more or less colorful, there were different working options, so similar to the pictures I've shown you before. Importantly, the redesign of the office took place before our first assessment. In organization A and C, it was shortly before the assessment, so less than 6 months before the first assessment. And in organization B and D, it was more than 1 year after the office change, the first assessment took place. So they were familiar with the modern office environment. In the first assessment at T1, we had 490 participants answering our online questionnaire. Most of them have been from organization A, as this was a larger organization than the others. But the response rate was above 50% for all participants, participating organizations. The average age was 44. We had 53 female participants, and every 4th participant had leadership responsibility. The tenure, most of the people participating were long-term employees, so they were in their organization for more than 10 years, but also a large amount of participants were in their organization less than 5 years. And 1 year after the first assessment, approximately 1 year, at T2, we had 180 participants, so there was a dropout rate. But these are the participants that could be matched to the first assessment, and we also had an organization drop out, which was organization B. They didn't want to complete the second assessment. But here the age and all the demographics were similar to study 1. The dropped out participants did not differ from the participants involved or analyzed here. The tenure was also very similar to participants in assessment 1. The online questionnaire we used had 3 main domains: the office environment, job demands, resources, and well-being. And we used various questions to investigate our different areas. For example, for office environment, we asked participants to state their office location or their work location during a typical work week. We also asked the number of workstations present in their office. Also, whether they experienced the office as open or rather closed. Or we will also ask about the number of working options present and how many working options they use during a typical workday. Also, the satisfaction with the office environment was assessed. For demands and resources, we used established questionnaires, all in German. For workload, we used the Fit by Richter. There was an example item is the working pace required is very high. We also assessed cognitive demands because it is said that open space offices should have an effect on the cognitive demands of the task. We used it with the ISTA scale, SEMA. One question is I often have to switch between different work tasks. So if you have to do lots of multitasking here, then open space offices might diminish the work output. Then we used control with the item. For example, the job allows me to decide on the order in which things are done on the job. We also had the scale of social support from the area of work-life scale from my Leiter. Members of my work group communicate openly. We also assess supportive leadership, which is adapted from a resilience scale. My leader reacts quickly and flexible to unexpected problems, and we also assess resilience. If something makes me angry at work, I can get my anger under control very quickly. For well-being, we use subjective well-being measured with the BHO5 and the irritation scale by. For well-being, an example question is, over the past week I felt cheerful and in good spirit, and for irritation, even at home, I often think of my problems at work. So in the first step, we looked at the 5 categories that have been proposed by Bodin, Daniels, and Bonin and used in many studies before. So we used the distinction from cell office to large open space office. As you can see, the numbers of participants between these 5 office categories are very different in size. So we use non-parametric statistics to answer our questions. As you can see, the large open space office is significantly better in some aspects compared to the other office categories. For example, satisfaction with the office environment. Participants in the large open space office stated that they are more satisfied with their office environment than all the other categories, participants in the other categories. Or they also reported more control than some of the other office categories, and also more supportive leadership. Importantly, when it comes to well-being, only subjective well-being differed significantly between the 5 office categories. As you can see here, the cell office and the large open space office had the highest amount of well-being, subjective well-being reported, whereas the shared room offices and the medium space open space offices had the lowest rate of well-being reported. Importantly, I have to note that in 3 categories there are only participants from organization A. This is cell office, shared room office, and small open space office. This is why we looked more closely at the role of the different office feature, as the organizational influence here might be prominent. So in the next step, we first conducted a microbar with office size and also organization on irritation and well-being. This was significant, so it allowed us to do more in-depth analysis. But here we used the multiple regression analysis with bootstrapping, as the sample sizes are really different. We used the 3-step multiple regression analysis. First on irritation, we had the covariates with gender, age, and leadership role, which were non-significant here, had no influence on irritation. And then we used office environment features like openness, desk sharing, numbers of options, working option used, the office size, of course, and the satisfaction with the office environment. Importantly here for irritation, we find that only satisfaction with the office environment had a significant influence on irritation at the first assessment. Also, the explained variance of the model is not so high, it's rather low. But when we added in the third step job demands and resources, we found a significant increase in explained variance, which is small to medium, and we also found that workload, supportive leadership, and resilience significantly contributed to irritation at the first assessment. Satisfaction with the office environment stayed significant but decreased in meaning. When it comes to subjective well-being, we found a little different result here. First of all, really important, covariates did influence subjective well-being. We found that age and gender had a significant influence, and that age buffered subjective well-being. So with advanced age, there was a higher subjective well-being. We also found desk sharing and satisfaction with the office environment to influence subjective well-being significantly. Here, desk sharing was negative correlated, so no desk sharing had less subjective well-being than more desk sharing. The explained variance is small to medium. Here, it's significant. When we added the job demands and resources, we found that workload control, subjective leadership, and resilience contribute to subjective well-being at the first assessment. We also found a significant increase in explained variance, which is medium to large. So with our model, the second model, where we added job demands and resources next to open space office features, we found a really high amount of variance explained. Also age, desk sharing, and satisfaction with the office environment stayed significant in the second model. When we looked at well-being in open space offices over time, we also did a Markova, repeated measure Markova at the beginning to see if there's a difference. We found only a significant change in irritation. That's why we only looked into irritation more closely, and also did a multiple regression analysis here on change of irritation. Change of irritation is the difference between T1 and T2. So if there is a high change of irritation, irritation increased at assessment 2 against assessment 1. So again, we did the same model that we had before. We found in the first model that age had a significant influence on the change of irritation. Again, age buffered here. So the change was less declined when you have with advancing age. Unfortunately, we did not find a significant in the model, and we did not find any influence of the office feature on change of irritation. When we added the job demands and control, the explained variance did not increase significantly, and it was still rather low. Also, we found an influence of social support on the change of irritation, which is a little bit contradicting, as increased social support correlated significantly with more change in irritation. We were wondering what could have happened. These is only organization A and C. So these are the organizations who had a change shortly before assessment 1. And we could explain or argue that social support might lead to increased effort of managing the change and adapting to the new office environment, which could lead to more thinking at home and to feel more irritated in this regard. When we look at the results, what can we discuss from it, or what can we take with us from it? First of all, in our first analytical step, we found that office size predicted subjective well-being but not irritation, and that participants in larger open space offices were significantly more satisfied with their office environment than participants in the other office environments. However, we had an unequal distribution of organizations between the categories. This made us wonder whether this also happened in other papers. So we suggest that we might change the variable examined, as office size might be influenced by the organizational distribution, also in other papers, as it is in our. As when you take several organizations, it's very unlikely that one organization has all 5 office categories. So the influence of the organizations and difference between the organizations need to be considered in future studies. Also, the effects of the office environment on employees' work and well-being should be measured with various variables. As you can see, number of work options, openness, or other variables also describe the new concept of open space offices, and office size as such might not be the variable really relevant for this area, or maybe not the key variable anymore. Also, really interesting for us, job demands and resources were more influential on than office features on well-being. We found that for both irritation and subjective well-being, satisfaction with the office environment, workload, supportive leadership, and resilience influenced these factors. Also, these results are in line with the JDR model proposed before. Resources had a stronger influence than demand on subjective well-being. Workload had a stronger influence on irritation than on subjective well-being. However, for desk sharing, we did not find what we proposed. It was associated with less subjective well-being. This has also been suggested in some reviews and other papers, that looking for a desk and being afraid that no desk is there anymore, or that not your favorite desk is there anymore, might cause stress and decreases well-being in this process. It also binds some resources and cognitive resources. We also found that office features might be more influential on subjective well-being than on irritation. Also, when you look at well-being over time, we did not find any change in subjective well-being, but only in irritation. But here we did not find any significant explained variance for our variables. It can be discussed why it is. We found that age has a significant influence and also social support, but the whole model wasn't significant. Also, really interesting, subjective impressions of the office might not be easily changed. We found that there was no difference between T1 and T2 in satisfaction with the office environment in organization A and C. Also, the change has been taking place shortly before T1, so they had 1 more year to work in this new office environment, but the satisfaction with the office environment stayed stable. This could mean that satisfaction with the office environment might not be influenced by objective features of the office environment purely, but also for subjective perceptions. Satisfaction with the office environment might be a good resource to foster well-being, but not to buffer. It's not a buffer against irritation or strain. You can also say that our paper, of course, and our analysis have strengths and limitations. We reported our results aggregated on the organizational level next to the office level, but therefore we cannot rule out that the organizational characteristic might influence the employer's perception of the office features and well-being, as mentioned before. We used cross-sectional and longitudinal data. Of course, there was a high dropout in regard to the longitudinal data, which is a strength that there is longitudinal data, but the sample is rather small. So maybe some effects that have been there did not turn significant here. For the office environment, we used self-reported observational data. However, we did not use objective measure for the working conditions and for the health or well-being variables, which should be added in future studies. You could, for example, use cortisol as stress measure or heart rate variability for measure of well-being. And for psychosocial working conditions, of course, you can also use observational data. What can be drawn from our results and from the studies? That is, there are several key factors for the office environment that has been pointed out by our results. It's the organization as a whole, the psychosocial work conditions, and the satisfaction with the office. So when implementing a new office space, you have to look at these key factors. Also, studies investigating employees' work and well-being and health should always address psychosocial working conditions and implement them in their design. Of course, as I pointed out, there's a big research gap because there's only a small amount of research on this topic. So more research is necessary to investigate the role of office feature on well-being, and it should add also psychosocial working conditions. Of course, in the current period we are in, there is one big open question that comes to mind when hearing about this paper. It is, what does the COVID-19 pandemic do with the office design? Where does it lead the office design? From our paper, we have in mind that office feature might not play the most important role for employees' well-being. So the social support or the amount of workload might be more influential, but it should not be neglected here. So it's really interesting to see where the organizations will go with this pandemic, as hygienic rules will be applied for at least 1 more year. In my opinion, it will still be going into the open space office direction, as most employees have found out that home office actually works and that it's possible in their organization, and that they can reduce costs by cutting floors and using ratios and desk sharing. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm open for questions now.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. And you addressed the question of COVID-19. There's so much discussion now about office spaces and will people return to office spaces outside of their own homes. And it sounds like you're optimistic that once the pandemic's ended or we're in our new normal, that people will go back to the office space. Do you think that's in Germany in particular, or do you think that's globally?
I personally think, yeah, I'm really optimistic that people will go back to the office. I'm not sure about 5 days or 6 days a week. I'm more confident about like 1 to 3 days a week. As when I talk people who are doing home office at the moment, they're really grateful for don't having to travel to their office because they save a lot of time, but they really miss the community and the people they're working with. They are working from home now for about a year or something. So I think there will be a pressure from the workforce that they want to go back into the office. And from my colleagues, I have a friend in Australia she also asked her supervisor to approve that she can go back to the office at least once a week. Also, there was the policy to not go back because she needed it. She needed to use the printer and do some work stuff she can only do in the office. Yeah, so I think people will go back. I repeat myself. But I think it won't look the same as it has been before.
So in relationship to your own research, now that we have the pandemic and we're going to be dealing with this new normal, what's next for you in research? What would you like to explore next?
I actually would love to push it a little further. We also had one company joining us in the project that did not have office space as such. They just had, I would call it a meeting space. So they had in the middle of Munich a really impressive office. But I think there were like 5 working station but more meeting rooms and some coffee area, and they had like 30 to 50 people working for them. And the owner of the company said the office should only be used for collaboration and to meeting for work, and all the other work they can do wherever they want. So I would be really interesting to look more closely into that area and see how people adjust to this lifestyle, which could also be driven from the pandemic. Of course, there's lots of research that investigates home office and the influence on the psychological health. Interestingly, most studies doing research on home office before the pandemic, they looked at work-life balance, but did not look at burnout or engagement. So I think there are still more research to be done in that area, and I would love to look into that more closely.
Yes, that's also true for me. I would like to do more research on telecommuting because I think it's going to stay, and on the medium range, I think it will get a higher share of work arrangement and work settings than it has been before. And yeah, there is actually not so much good research work on telecommuting as one would assume. I mean, telecommuting has been around for decades now, but there is still a scarcity of longitudinal studies, and only by looking at telecommuting and its effect on performance and well-being on the long run can tell you something about the dynamic of how it unfolds to work in the office at home. It's well imaginable that initially one is really challenged, but after a while, as with so many other things, one gets used to it and makes good use of the advantages it offers. So we need longitudinal data, and we also urgently need to look at moderators, that is variables that influence how telecommuting unfolds. For example, it might make a big difference whether you work in the office at home just for 1 or 2 days a work week rather than exclusively. Or it might, of course, or very likely make a difference how your office at home is set up. And also it might make a difference what the rules of collaboration with the other telecommuters in your company are. And so it's, yeah, there is much more complexity that should be uncovered than has been so far.
Thank you. And with the journal work, we are getting quite a few submissions regarding the impact of COVID on working and different professionals. But it's more short term in the sense of, the pandemic was announced, March 2020, and then studying for this year. You make a case how important it is to look at it more long term. And so I would challenge or suggest people who listen to this webinar to consider crafting research projects that can follow workers from home, like you said, telecommuting, to see the impact. So one more time regarding that, because that's so interesting. What would you study with a longitudinal study of people working from home? What variables do you think will be important to study?
One potentially big influence is how often one works in one's home's office. Is it 1 day or 2 a week, or is it exclusively? I think that changes a great deal. As Sarah mentioned before, working exclusively at home might cause one to miss one's collaborators a lot, and a lot of positive stimulation is lost that way, and also supervisory support is lost. So yeah, that is one variable, how often one telecommutes. I would like to include in a longitudinal study. But yeah, as you might know, it's not trivial to run a longitudinal study. It's really expensive, and there is the danger of dropout. People leave the study for different reasons. So one has to start with a quite large sample at the outset to be left with enough people at the end of the study.
Yes, absolutely. If that's so important to keep in mind.
Can I add something?
Oh, yes, please, Sarah. We'll have you add something, and then we'll conclude the webinar.
Okay. I also would find it very interesting to look on a team level. As Anja mentioned before, rules are very important, and I think they ease communication, communication between home office workers. As we found also with the open space office, not mentioned here in this article, but we found that if there are certain rules on where to take a phone conference or how to behave in the office, it makes everybody more comfortable and easy to work in this environment. So I also think that the challenge here is to adjust to the home office, to find rules that work in your organization and in your team, so that miscommunication or double work does not exist. Yeah, so that's, I think, a way to promote health in that area. And that's what I would love to also look into more closely.
Absolutely. Thank you both. This was so interesting, and I hope that someday we do see these longer studies. But until that time, I think these short-term studies are going to provide us with information to help guide us in the future. And your paper was very informative, and your webinar really provided and highlighted many of the key points from your article. So thank you for publishing in Work. And I look forward to receiving more publications from you. And for our listeners, please go to our workjournal.org website to listen to our webinars. Thank you very much again for being here.
Thank you, Karen, for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.